You guys, welcome to another episode of Soft Rebellion. My name is Indatu, and thank you so much for joining me. So, I'm going to be very quick today. I wanted to talk about the role that church plays in creating the perfect victim. Now, this could be a victim for abuse or any form of violence, really. And obviously, this is an anecdotal experience based off of my own lived experiences and also from observation. It doesn't mean that it's applicable to everyone, but I really drew these parallels recently. And I mean, it is something that I've been thinking about, but never quite had the vocabulary to express. It was until I was listening to That Husband podcast by Black Newborn. I think I was talking to his wife or something. Now, for context, Black runs this podcast called That Husband Podcast. I love it. As someone who aims to be in a romantic relationship with a man, I find a lot of insights from a man's perspective. Granted, they are Christian men because that's the foundation of Black's belief and most of the guests that he bring into the show. You know, they want to live godly lives and also be present husbands in their families' lives, to be fathers and that sort of thing, right? And it's premised on the fact that they don't, they're not perfect, but they do seek to do better by knowing better, and like learning through others' experiences is a way in which they can achieve this. Black also announced that him and his wife are planning to start a church. And I have been looking for a church community for a while. You know, after leaving Pretoria, I really struggled to find a home that, or a church environment that I can feel at home in, be plugged in and be more involved. Because right now I've just been attending church sometimes, and I never really feel grounded in it. Like I never really feel the need to participate, to do anything other than just be a church attendee at, very seldom intervals. So when he talked about this, I was like, oh my goodness, this is an all-brainer, because one thing about Black, he is so creative. I think doesn't fit the mold about what a Christian pastor is supposed to look like. He's like very cool, and he was even joking about looking like a top billing presenter, because they always troll him about his looks. So he talks about wanting to be a church of God in the world, because you can't ignore the culture in which we exist, the context in which we exist. And for me, I always find that contrast to be quite a huge area of conflict when I'm in church, because how I express myself outwardly can sometimes be in contravention to what church preaches. And so people would look at me suspiciously as if I'm not godly enough, or I'm not a believer enough, or I'm possessed or lesbian, or whatever other principles church preaches against, but I just couldn't reconcile that. And so that became one of the reasons why I stayed away. Like basically right now, I'm not a churchgoer. I'm not a regular churchgoer. Guys. But I miss it. Like I miss being in church, fellowshipping with people, being a part of something. I think for the most part, running has given me some of that, because I really do feel a sense of accomplishment with being, out there in the morning. And when I face difficulty and I know I'll get through it, it almost has become a conduit through which I can communicate with God. But obviously, the traditional ways as well are still irreplaceable. And so that's why I've been looking. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm going to join Black's church. It's called Men in the Middle. As they were talking with his wife in this particular podcast episode, they mentioned how firstly, they're expecting twins, and they'd put off the decision for so long because they were worried about other materialistic things like provision and whatever else. I am paraphrasing, so you have to refer to the episode yourself for more context. But they mentioned, various reasons why they felt it wasn't the right time to have kids. But essentially, the realization they made was that there will always be something, and they wished more people would actually just make the leap and have kids. And Black was commenting on how societies currently use all sorts of excuses as gods. He was talking about the fact that people, as an idol rather, that people idolize their independence, they idolize money and all these other things that they chase instead of having kids. And that was so uncomfortable to hear, because I thought surely this is an oversimplification. But also, I could have taken it out of context, right? But it also then, took me back to these initial thoughts I'd had about how church really does, promote some of these behaviors indirectly, which may leave women vulnerable to all sorts of abuse. We know how reproduction, for instance, has held women back in society and therefore made them complicit in their own abuse, or made them victims to being abused, and any chance of them living an abusive situation almost gets diminished to zero when they don't have any economic opportunities that they can explore. And in South Africa, we know education is one way in which people can pursue economic opportunities, right? Because we don't come from wealth. The majority of us don't come from generational wealth that can be passed down from one to the next. And often, or historically, that passing down of wealth or assets, or really any valuable property that could be left from one generation to the next, it used to be done through the male line, because the idea is that they get to maintain the family name and right. Women were often excluded from that, and for the largest part, this is still the case in terms of land ownership and so I was so uncomfortable, and I was like, man, now I know this was not the intention, because I know the kind of thinking that Black has, and also having listened to the podcast for over a year now, I know where his mind is at. But I also just couldn't help but hold church accountable in general now for how they really do perpetuate some of these patriarchal practices that leave women vulnerable to these situations. I remember when I was deeply involved in church, and how every sermon, like on like girls' sermons specifically, I'm sure there would be services that are targeted to brothers and to sisters, to mothers and to fathers, or brothers and fathers would be mixed. But then the married women and the unmarried women would be divided. In our unmarried women sermons or sessions, they would always talk about marriage. It was like a thing that you aspire to. And it's almost impossible being in a church space without aspiring to marriage, because that's what is being preached. In the following episode that has been podcast published, there was this guy, I forgot his name. He got married when he was 21. And I think about how that actually becomes a goal when you are within that space. And thinking back now, I hardly knew myself at 21. I was doing things to impress my parents, the people at church. I had no sense of identity whatsoever. I was constantly scared and just so uncertain about my role in the world. The sense of identity I got is something that came later on, and it came with so much confidence, because at least I had some clue. This is not to say this is everyone's experience. Obviously, I know that mine isn't applicable to everyone. And some people may have been the opposite, but it boggles my mind that we are promoting those kind of things, and yet people truly don't even know themselves. But I also understand, because of the mission that church is in, which is to, multiply and grow, godly families and that sort of thing, right? It's easy to promote growth or to even achieve the mandate of multiplication and growth when you promote for early marriages. At the time, people really don't have a strong sense of identity, or even, they're not individualized in the way that they live as much as we are now. And so it's easy to then, coexist with someone else, or even forego certain things in service of this greater mandate that you've established. And so I often think about that. But the other risk, which I don't think church mitigates enough, is exposing young girls to potential abuse, which I've alluded to earlier. I mean, chances of a 21-year-old man having resources to raise a family are very slim. And so you live a group of young people, young women specifically, to be potential wives to these, older guys who maybe a bit more experienced, and they work and have some, resources to then go pay lobola, to pay for the wedding and that sort of thing. But that's where the power dynamic also shifts, right? Because age gap, for instance, again, from my own experience, does create an imbalance and conditions in which abuse can take place. Even if it was like an older woman with a younger guy, that dynamic also exists, and it's something that makes me so uncomfortable. And in hindsight, I am so grateful that I got over that niche much earlier on. Like in the past, I used to think, it's best to date someone who's slightly older because they're much more mature. They're established, so they're less likely to be jealous of your own, professional pursuits because you're not in competition and whatnot. What a load of bull, because your older guys will literally drain the youth from you. Like, they will steal your life. People have spoken about destiny swap. I think there's no one as miserable as like a dried up 40-something-year-old who is just trying to steal whatever is left of your 20s and 30s just to make themselves feel alive again, And I don't think that's an exception within the church space. It's just unfortunate that once they wear, the church language and the purity language and whatnot, they get to mask some of that. But really, I highly advocate that people date within their age group. And again, this is not applicable to everyone, but like, I swear by this, and that's something that I'm going to continue to maintain, because imagine having wasted your 20s and your 30s with someone who has already done it. The excitement for life is gone because they've been so disappointed so many times, and they try to drain whatever life is left from you to make themselves feel better. And Sana, now you wake up one day as a 30-year-old, as a 40-year-old, maybe even older, feeling like, what just happened? Like, why did I waste so much of my life with someone who wasn't even deserving of me wasting my life with? And the reason I'm saying wasting my life isn't necessarily because I think failed relationships are a waste of life. They aren't. And as a lover of life, I see every experience as something to, to celebrate, to enjoy, to learn from, and whatever else, right? But when you can see, here there was no lesson, there was nothing, there was just a waste of life, run away from that, because really there's just no need. Like, I don't think there's any need to go through the stage of dating someone for so long, especially like when you give your life so much to someone who isn't deserving, and they are just going through their own midlife crisis, And I say this because women generally tend to give of themselves in relationships. They do make sacrifices. They do invest their time, energy, and resources into the other person. as opposed to investing that time into growing themselves and bettering themselves and really figuring out what it is that they want and how they want to add value in the world. And so I think in promoting early marriages, church neglects to address some of those potential issues that may arise. And I've also seen how older men then marry younger girls with promising futures, but really end up stealing that potential because someone could be, in a service job or whatever, like I want to say a low income job, and end up taking away that opportunity from someone else. And Sana, one thing about marriage, it's like you're consenting to how the rest of your life is supposed to unfold. You're consenting to the quality of your life, of your mental health, your physical well-being, where you guys live, where you take your kids to school, how their lives, will look like, your financial well-being, your stability, everything is tied to the partner that you end up choosing. And so as a 21-year-old, a 25-year-old, I don't think it's necessary for you to be making those decisions forever. You know what I mean? Because that's what marriage actually is. And so in promoting these marriages and these lives to build kingdom-oriented families, that's something that we need to at least be telling people about. And I think church has really come short in that regard. But the other part which, touches me even more is how church builds obedient women. Like church hates any individualism, or any sense of identity that deviates from a Christ-like character. That's what is often referred to, a virtuous woman. It's very good at building or raising obedient women who forgo their own needs and desires and intuition to trust a man, specifically a man, or an authority figure. That authority figure in marriages is usually your husband. That's what is being heavily preached in church. In the workplace, it's your boss, who is typically a man. And like there's many instances in which a man is the authority figure. And so I think by preaching, this obedience, blind obedience, Christ-like character and whatnot, however you interpret that, we are really raising women who are so easy to control, and women who are such easy targets for abuse. And I think part of the reason why I even fell into, some of the situations that I fell into were precisely because of that, being able to accept situations without questioning. And even if you did have questions, you'd ignore them because that's not something that's being encouraged in the church. And if you've grown up in that environment for so long, you aren't just gonna walk away from your training, from your indoctrination, with a blink of an eye or just like that. It's like fighting your own body to do what you've been taught. You will feel that something is not right, but because you've been so trained to ignore that intuition, you do it easily to a point where, guys, you just feel so helpless in certain situations. But because you have to be obedient, sometimes you don't even have the language to explain why it is that you're being complicit in your own suffering, in your own violation and abuse, but you just are. And I do hold church partly responsible for that. And this isn't because I'm against church. I very am for church, or for faith and having a sense of a belief system rather. I think it's great for our own moral compass. I mean, a society that doesn't have a moral compass is very doomed. We see that with the likes of the USA, and how morally corrupt they are and how they're now falling into doom. With the Epstein files, we see how people just continue to push boundaries in terms of violating human life, including children, which is the most sacred part of any society, So when we start enacting some of these violences and atrocities own children, then we know that we're far too gone and our moral compass doesn't exist at all. So I like church for that reason, because it does keep a sense of right and wrong, but I think church is so biased in how it teaches that. And oftentimes, especially when it comes to women, it does teach that you ignore your own internal, moral compass for the sake of servicing this or pleasing this authority figure. And unfortunately, that does have serious consequences. And I think that's something I really wanted to talk about. I wish there was a balance in how we teach young girls to have a heart for God, and for doing good in the world and aspiring to build beautiful families, while also making sure that they themselves are people that they can love. I think back to being a teenager and how everyone praised me for being good and godly and all these things, but inside I felt hollow because I had no sense of self, and it felt like a lot of things were a betrayal to self. And so then I veered off to the complete opposite side where I'm just self-serving and I'm focusing on what I want to do with no bearing towards religion whatsoever. And so I think it can be alienating once people wake up from that haze of religious dogma, and that's why you see some of the strongest critiques of church are people who have grown up in the church. So what I would like to see is, how do we then build families and people and women that are balanced, that have a heart for wanting to see the world progress, but also not at their expense. I was listening to this I came across this video of this girl. She's in high school and she was talking about how people often comment amazed that she's so, well read and smart for someone in high school, and like for a young person, because thinking apparently nowadays is deteriorating. And she talks about how when she was growing up, her dad would make her read these scientific findings. And there was this one particular case study in which scientists put mice in a controlled environment. And they made sure that this was like a perfect utopia, where there was enough supply of food, of everything, and there was no conflict whatsoever. It was literally just the perfect environment. Obviously, this study has never been tested with humans, but in a way, it is a microcosm for how, the greater society functions and how things would work out, or at least that's the deduction they made from the study. And because there was no need, there was no striving, there was nothing, the mice fell into boredom and they started undertaking these destructive behaviors. They would be so destructive that things eventually got bad, even though it was a perfect utopia. And one of the lessons there were that as species, as animals, we do need purpose. We are a purpose-driven species. And so, and this is true for humans as well, by the way. I see how, when there's a difficulty, you work hard to strive, and then there's just another one after that. And that's how societies have progressed. That's how we've managed to see innovations and technologies and everything. But without any challenges, you see it with the West as well, and how it's declined over the years because they've virtually eliminated most of the challenges. And you find people complaining about a train that's 2 minutes late, whereas we would be stuck in traffic for 2 hours, you know what I mean? And still be grateful that, okay, maybe today we waited 30 minutes. That wasn't bad, So yes, as a society, we do need, purpose and something to work towards, and it keeps us honest. It keeps us striving and like wanting to be better and whatnot. And it keeps us from being destructive and engaging in all these behaviors that end up being our own doom. So I think church in that regard does that very well, because it really gives society something to work towards, and the fact that church always preaches that we're sinners. I mean, we can have debates about that as well, about whether or not that's fair or even right. But there's almost a humility that comes with knowing that you're not perfect and you can never be perfect. And so the contribution you want to make in society is from that standpoint. And you can never look down on others as well, because you know that, hey, even you yourself have your own flaws. So in that regard, church really does bond together societies. But I think that doesn't take away then from the responsibility that it has in regards to this particular matter that I've raised. And so, yeah, I really wanted to leave that up to you guys. I don't know what the lesson should be. It might not necessarily be with church. Maybe there's other areas in your life that you've identified may be problematic, because they tend to promote one side without taking, responsibility over consequences. I'm really keen to hear what you have to say on that, if there's any other examples you can share. But this really has been, bothering me, and I wanted to put it out there. I'm still going to join Black's Church in the Middle, when they do finally launch in August, and I do want to be involved. But I think knowing Black as well, it will probably be a space where we can honestly and openly have these kind of conversations, because I think they do matter in the grander scheme of things. And if we do want to see a change for the better, then it's important that we start being balanced in our approach, and also mitigating some of these unintended consequences that our doctrine perpetuate, So yeah, that's all I've got to say today. I do need to get my dog outside. It's his poop time. And guys, thank you so much for joining me. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. I am going through the most, so some of these episodes are few and far apart recently, but I'm still going to be here. I'm not going anywhere. And when I do have spurts of energy like I did this afternoon, then I'm definitely going to keep recording, and hoping to share some of my thoughts. And I do want to hear from you again. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review. Tell me your thoughts, whatever you thought about it. Even if you didn't enjoy, or you differ in your opinion, tell me, leave a comment. I think Spotify allows you to do that. I'm really curious to hear. But guys, thank you again for joining me. Really appreciate each and every one of you. Please have a beautiful rest of your day. I will see you guys at the next episode. Bye.